Tonight we have a special guest. We're going to be talking about the Delphi case. We're going to be talking about the Idaho case with Bryan Kohberger, Richard Allen in Delphi. Today is the 7th year anniversary of when the bodies were discovered for Libby and Abby. So it's a anniversary, so to speak. But without further ado, we're going to bring in our guest. He is a real C.S.I, criminal scene investigator, formerly retired, formerly also law enforcement. His name is Steve, and he has a YouTube channel called True Crime Web. What is up, Steve? How you doing, my man?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm honored to be here and appreciate this opportunity, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I had a good time last time you were on. We had a lot of good positive feedback about the show, and since then there's been a lot of questions that have come through, whether they're in comments or emails that I thought that it'd be good to get your expertise on. And so with that being said, first and foremost, I want to get your opinion on the Delphi case and where they're at right now. The last time we spoke, I think since then the attorneys were let go. They've been put back, and now there's, I think there's a hearing coming up, a motion to dismiss due to some exculpatory evidence. What are your thoughts on all that before we get into the evidence aspect?
Well, I think that this whole case is something that I've never seen so much unknown paths that we go through with the court system. Every court hearing has been a new avenues opened up about something that we've never seen in our court system, which is good in one aspect, as far as that it exposes us to see how that the courts are self-righting and oversight. And but this case, there's issues with not only the crime scene processing, but of some of the new lost evidence as far as recordings being made over each other. And I expect that when the trial does occur, there's going to be some officers that's going to have some difficult testimony. They're going to have some hard times up there because they're going to, and rightly so, you don't want to lose of any case. You don't want to lose any type of evidence and critical recording. Plus, what does the appearance of this cause, and we can see it in the social media platforms of that. Well, it's a cover-up. Things are happening or occurring, and it's just one big mess. It's amazing. I can't, what would be the next step and what would be the next hurdle. No way I can predict it because no one's predicted how we got here.
Yeah, it sure has been. It's been crazy. When I first heard that there was a cult-like ritualistic aspect to this case, I thought that was kind of hocus pocus stuff. And then the more things start to happen, the more I'm like, man, there's some not so much stuff that I think is I wouldn't go to the nature of shady or that there's something intentionally going on here, but there's something going on. And now you have this aspect where they deleted evidence. To me, I think that it's going to be very difficult to get a conviction in this case because of some of the mishaps that police have done in this case, and well, let's get into some of it. One of the things that has just kind of been brought up is the bullet that was found, the unspent round. It was found apparently at the second securing of the scene. Apparently there was a first securing where the bodies were. They took their pictures and whatnot, and took the bodies and didn't process the scene. They left, then they went back, secured it again, and at that securing is when they found the bullet. How common is something like that where you find evidence like that at the second go around?
Well, I've experienced it myself as far as processing vehicles, and when you have things. We missed. I think one time someone had like 12 to 15,000 grand hidden inside of a vehicle on a drug deal that was missed during the original search, and the family said, "Hey, there's money in that car," so I had to go back and eventually found it. Had to tear it apart. Whereas originally we were just working a homicide that occurred in the front seat. We weren't into processing a inaccessible area of this vehicle that where the money was hidden. That was the one of the keys of why the homicide occurred for this robbery. But for this outdoor scene and a bullet of such a horrible crime, and law enforcement knowing that there was a firearm involved and not being able to find that bullet, yeah, there's metal detectors should have picked it up. Was it a failure of the equipment? Did they not use metal detectors? And when they, did they recover it that first day? There's still that possibility it was recovered during the first search. We don't know the timeline or the evidence sheet, which will reveal the exact date that law enforcement placed their hands on that bullet.
So typically, then, if they're going to go back, there's a reason to go back,
Yes.
right?
Uh,
I
if you just go in there and halfway do things and then you have to go back time and time again, bad on you. That's not the way you operate. When you leave that crime scene, there should not be anything. If you go in there and look at some of the FBI training videos of outdoor crime scene processing, you'll see that when they go in there and they remove all the ground debris, that it looks like a garden. You just have dirt there, and so that's been screened. Everything's been raked back. Metal detectors been processed through there. Who was in charge? What steps were taken? Those are questions that we'll find out in court. Was the bullet just missed using it, or that's just something we don't have the answer for. But we know at some point there was a bullet found, and how did it get there? And it does open up a window of opportunity of a crime scene that was unsecured, that either be planted or the offender or the accused. Let's put it that way: the accused, while he's denied ever being on that property, he may not have realized that that was the property. And I don't know where Ron Logan lives. I don't know what
Right.
Logan owns. And have I been to the creek side? Absolutely. I was there. I was within a few hundred feet of it that day.
Mhm.
And, is that an out that his attorneys and him may explore during testimony? Possible. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, and well, the other concerning thing is its location. I think that the description of its location in the probable cause affidavit was in between the bodies, so it was relatively close. I think that the bodies were probably about 2 3 feet apart, and so somewhere in between there, it's not a very large area that they would have, had to have searched and gone over. From my understanding, is it was buried. You know, that would tell me that, in my opinion, that it was probably dislodged due to a struggle, and during the process, the slide went back, it came out, and during that struggle, it got buried with the feet, kicking it underneath the dirt because the dirt was there. I don't think you can just merely step on it and it'll get dirt over. In fact, let's look that up. You did some test on that, is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah. I still have some testing I'm conducting currently. I have some rounds I've dropped on top of the leaf debris here. Now, then I scrape back the earth and place some bullets and then unspent rounds on the ground. And I stepped on all of these, and this is in the position of this. But I've also will be conducting some of trying to bury a bullet that's left on top of the leaf debris and trying to push it through that surface. I've tried it a couple of times. It's not easy to get it in this position when there's little sticks, twigs, and brush. So as I continue the test, we'll have more and more information about. But I did realize, even in the early stages of going back and pulling the first bullets after day one, that when you pull those bullets, there is some soil that comes with them. And if they have soil samples collected, they will be able to establish that that bullet package came from that location. So people won't be able to say that, well, I found a bullet there, and where's the soil, and be able to test that soil, because I don't know who found the bullet, don't know where they found it. I
Hmm.
know where they say they found it, but there's ways of testing that and doing comparisons that might um, bring in some doubt that if that soil sample doesn't match the crime scene, there might be issues.
Right. Well, yeah, that definitely would be an issue. But to me, I think that would be very difficult to plant a, especially if it was like law enforcement. I think that that's kind of like one of the theories that is going out there, that maybe law enforcement planted it or something. For them to plant it and then wait 5 years to arrest a guy, that's kind of weird. I don't think that that jives. But
No.
here you have these bullets being pressed in. It brings me the question: if you were in charge of this scene, you have the bodies. You would process, I'm assuming, the sticks first because they're on top, and you would go from the top to the bottom. Would all the leaves be picked up? Would it be left bare like this? How much? How would you
But,
process the scene?
well, of course, it always starts from the first officer arrives on the scene and secures the scene and creates that uh, crime scene taped off area. And then, of course, then you look for um, how did the offender enter? How did he leave? And try to protect those easily uh, areas of travel, of ingress and egress, and protect those areas and don't walk them yourselves. You have to may go in there and bushwhack, come in an area that we know he didn't either come in or leave through those areas, trying to protect as much as possible because he may have injuries to himself,
Mhm.
whereas he may have a blood trail that we just don't see yet. And we may have, in daylight sometimes finding blood trails isn't that easy. But with some chemicals and low light, you can absolutely identify them. I mean, they just jump out at you when they're um, uh, like with luminol in low
Mhm.
light conditions. But the processing would be that from the first vision or visual inspection of the areas, looking for evidence and how can I collect this evidence and not destroy shoe prints, footprints, blood evidence, dropped evidence such as bullets or um, anything of this nature that you might find. Uh, and it's a long process because you will go through layers. If you had those sticks, if you had leaves, and then because not only that, but you're looking for certain points of confrontation. If
Mhm.
it is a violent crime and you have individuals that are not under control, people don't die easy. They fight their struggles. If they're not controlled, or if they have any life in them and awareness, people fight. You have fight or flight, and if you can't flee, people fight. There is that survival instinct in all of us, and so you would look for those areas of disturbance and leaf patterns because that's where you're going to find the different types of that. If we have a sharp edge weapon, you'll have the cast off. You'll have pools of possible different types of body fluids or even blood, and that's what you look for. And you identify those areas because in those areas is where the confrontation, the violent encounters occur, and that's most likely where you're going to have the hair, the fiber, the transfers. Because how many times in your career have you went and you've seen two individuals get in a fight and there's not some type of hair pulling?
Mhm.
And and of course, hair is critical if you can collect it and find it.
Got you. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think in this situation, there is a possibility, given the age of the victims, if they froze, they may not have grabbed any hair, but having hair being pulled out if they fought or any of those type of things or try to run away. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so, to this picture, this is a test that you did to
Yes.
show bullets being pressed into the ground. Now,
Yeah.
all you did was merely step on these bullets. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. This area here is in Georgia. I've been to the crime scene several times. I've been to the actual where the girls were located, stood there, looked at the properties across the creek, Deer Creek.
Hmm.
And from the cemetery, I've traveled it both in daylight and in total darkness to see how easy it would be able to traverse in those areas. And it's extremely difficult. It's not easy. Um, but there's this test here, like I said, I conducted it here on the property here in Georgia. I have some that I just dropped on top of a leaf pattern, leaf debris, and tried to step on and bury them. They're currently setting up there exposed to the elements, and we're doing time trials on them to see if we can determine how long that bullet was exposed to the elements. In this part of the test, I have these 3 rows of bullets. I have a nickel brass round that's on the left, the shiny ones to the left. And then I have just a regular brass round that's next to it. And then as you come across, this is a steel case round, and then to the right is aluminum. Now, they're not all 9 millimeters or 40 cals, which was recovered. The 40 cals are the first 2 to the left, but I didn't have the full selection of 40 calibers that had steel casing and aluminum casing. So I just used different calibers because they'll still age the same and show the same characteristics of exposure. But yes, I scrape back the dirt so as if you would try to simulate some type of violent encounter where you will have exposed earth, bullet falls, it gets stepped on and ground into the ground. That's what this is supposed to replicate. And I'll go collect these. I'm going to be collecting another set tomorrow, and then 30 days from the time I put them out there, I'll collect those final ones, and start fingerprinting and processing them and photographing them so that we can see what happens to the patina, or as you know, certain materials are, as they age and are exposed, they take on certain characteristics and are tarnished. And that's what we're going to be looking for and seeing if you can timestamp how long a bullet's been left out in the dirt.
Wow. Yeah, that's gonna be awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Just to kind of get an idea, especially like they said, this was a bullet that was found at the second investigation of the scene, according to court TV. I don't know how accurate that is. I haven't seen it myself. But you mentioned that you've gone out there and you put bullets on the floor on top of leaves and tried to bury them. You did that with your feet as well?
Yes, with boots and let's see, tennis shoes, and both of them. Either one of them is difficult, but I'll go and do some video and show you the process. And
can you tell that you were trying to do that? Like, is there an obvious scene there?
Yes, it takes quite an effort to get it through the leaf pattern, and so I mean, it's not something that you wouldn't see at a violent encounter. And we know that if with Libby and Abby, Libby was a pretty good sized athlete,
Mm-hmm.
and so she could have put up quite the struggle. And so you could have that. The reason the round was ejected and found here is due to some type of manipulation with the firearm herself, or him bringing it in to threaten them.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know. But regardless, if the bullet wound up on the ground and was stepped on and ground in, it would take not just walking. Walking will not indent and place that round buried. Um, I've been there, and I know the ground at that time of year can be frozen, although the temperatures were higher and it hadn't frozen. The temperature were above freezing for several days uh, in that time frame, or hovering right around the freezing temperature. Um, if the bullet had landed in an area that might have been low lying and muddy, then that might explain how you could bury a bullet with a single step. But that'd be the only.
Uh, I think you may have answered it. They walked through the river or the creek. He most likely had mud on his feet. If he stepped on it, and that part of that area had mud, then that's how it probably, you know, impressed himself here, and then the mud on top of it. Because the problem is for me is, they didn't find it until the second go around, which means there wasn't anything visible for them to have seen. If they're, obviously there, for them to have seen something. I feel that if they would have seen the area where it was dug in, there would have been obvious, movement, like you mentioned. Things would have been disturbed there, and they would have probably found it day one, unless the guy had mud on his shoes, pressed it in like this, and the mud covered over it, and then dried up within the next few days.
Mhm. Very possible.
Huh.
Yeah, and but it'd have to take some uh, extenuating circumstances to get it buried because it's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, if I went to a mud hole and stepped on a bullet, I can make it go out of sight.
Mhm.
But just stepping on the leaf debris itself, and the ground cover there, I've been there, like I said, both winter and summer,
Mhm.
and there's a good bit of ground debris. It wouldn't be easy, but there's also some thin areas that if that bullet landed in a certain low-lying area, that it's possible, um, if conditions are right, to bury it just with a footstep, especially if you cross the creek, as you say, that if you go up that embankment, and we see all the mud in the world on those embankments, that if he came up it, and from the images that are there, you can see that there are certain transfers as far as the victim clothing, that there is mud. And so they would have came through that muddy area, and it could be just as simple as a muddy view with heavy lugs that would have buried that bullet, even
Yeah.
on top of the leaves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, supposedly he was described as muddy and bloody at one point by one witness, and so that would, I think, make a little bit more sense to me as far as why they didn't find it or they didn't see it initially. Um, but does it concern you though that, according to the defense, I think in some of their paperwork or in their statements that they've said that they don't have pictures of the ammunition in the ground or anything. They just have a bullet afterwards, after it was dug up.
Well, if you follow that thought process, the only way that they don't have pictures of it is that it wasn't recovered by the CSI team, um,
Hmm.
first or second
Yeah,
time. Now, you know,
that's true. Makes sense. Yeah.
uh, because if it was recovered by a CSI team that failed to follow protocols and proper documentation from the overall view shots, the mid-range views, the close-up, the placards, the recovery process, then they're going to have a hard day on the stand also.
Yeah. Yeah. You see, and those are the things that I find concerning. And you're right. That means that it wasn't a CSI guy. Then it's probably, you know, if they opened up the scene, I'm assuming that you're probably going to have a lot of people going in and looking for things, podcasters, investigators, journalists, the whole nine yards. Is it possible that one of those guys found it and they notified, law enforcement, and, they go out there and that's the reason for the second time that they secure the scene? I think that's possible.
Yeah. And if they did go back, and whoever found the bullet, they would have been taken back to the scene. And if if it was found by CSI, of course, we should have documentation from photography and a evidence sheet of why it was there. But if it was picked up, handled, and then delivered to the CSI, would still go back, and we'll have photographs of that area. And I don't know if I sent you the images, but if that bullet was buried in the ground, um, in some of my other images, I have that when you pull that bullet out of the ground, there's a depression there, the outline of that bullet
Hmm.
in the soil, so that you see how these bullets go back one. You see how those bullets are pressed into the ground. Well,
Yeah.
when you pull it up, there's a void that matches that same impression. So that if they did go back, and even whoever recovered it, unless they just went in there and just pulled up a handful of dirt, but if they removed it, you should still have a matching depression in the soil that could be documented, that would support that this is where the bullet was found exactly.
That makes sense. That would be supporting evidence. I'm going to answer a few of these questions. I'm going to bring them up for you. We have some questions
Sure.
for you. It says, this one's from Miss Cunningham. Says, do you think that his attorneys not only leaked it, but if possible, destroyed any evidence?
His attorneys,
Yeah.
well, in the discovery part of it, no. Now they may have other evidence, and the evidence that they find, that in discovery that they send back, but they believe he's innocent, and there's certain rules that officers of the court have to go by. You can't be destroying any kind of evidence that will, regardless of who finds it. You just don't just find something and say, "Oh, that's bad for my client, and I'm
Yeah.
going to destroy it."
Yeah, I mean, whatever they get is probably something that the prosecution has documented, anyways. J Turkey Jaime comes in with this question. Says, if the Delphi case is dismissed, can the family of the victims file a lawsuit against the law enforcement for their screw up? Especially if it comes to light that this thing is dismissed based on the fact of the processing of the scene wasn't done correctly.
I wouldn't imagine, and I wouldn't imagine that would be the case. But you never know with how our court systems are now. But I don't even see that. The courts will rule that's frivolous and other things that, and there's probably standing out there somewhere of certain things that occurred. Now you'll have that. I think there's been lawsuits, whereas other victims that if law enforcement had followed proper protocols and procedures on other crime scenes, and that same offender went out and committed that, that's more of likely where someone down the road that was hurt later might have an option. But I don't believe on this one that would apply.
Got you. Um,
That's
Quinn B
my
said,
personal opinion, and of course that means nothing.
you're right. Well, that's for everybody that's commenting on this case from afar. It's just all opinions. Queen B comes in saying, was the crime scene released and then they went back and found the bullet? That's what Court TV is alleging. I'm not sure how true that is or not. I would assume, given their credibility and how they investigate crimes, that is probably accurate, but it hasn't been for sure. NH Mountain says, would the team use metal detectors on site? How soon do you think, when you have a crime scene like this, should a metal detector be on site? And is a metal detector something that maybe perhaps they didn't have access to right away, given the size of the law enforcement that's there in that small area?
We used them looking for sometimes trying to find either a bullet that was used in a homicide or something that might have passed through a victim. Um, but those are usually towards the end of it because to use a metal detector, you're all through the crime scene. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll need to process areas under the victims, near other evidence, and because there's certain grid patterns that you have to walk. That whatever your search pattern that you're using, that as you walk that grid, you don't. Other people are performing certain acts and looking for things, and but it would be one of the later processes of the crime scene, and uh, I would imagine. Now, that doesn't say that you can't use a metal detector, that once you've done a visual inspection of a path towards a victim, that there's nothing wrong with that. If you have the time and you want to run a metal detector as you walk towards that to look for certain things just like this, there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Everybody processes crime scenes. You're trained to do it a certain way. And if you think that, hey, you find a bullet 30 or 50 feet away from the crime scene and it's just openly exposed or exposed, that, hey, there may be other bullets along the path.
Mm-hmm.
Then you work it at the early stages of as you walk towards your victims. But, there's a lot of different ways, and not everybody processes crime scenes in a set order. Everybody has, because the crime scene itself will dictate the order in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Now, if the bullet is pressed in, one of the biggest questions is, would there be touch DNA or fingerprints on that cartridge or that unspent round? And given the fact that the person who would have had to have put that round in the magazine, which would have been him pushing the finger, pushing it with his finger, would the ground and it being pressed into the ground destroy that evidence or manipulate it?
Well, tomorrow, these rounds that I recovered last week,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna process them. They have dry dirt on them. I'm gonna process them of these 4 rounds here I recovered last week, and I'm recovering some more with fresh dirt to simulate not only a bullet's been left out for multiple days, but even if law enforcement recovered it that first day and processed it, what will those fingerprint possibilities be? Will they be ridge detail? And is it this bullet that they're looking at? Is that the source of the partial fingerprint? Because there's not, but at crime scenes, outdoor crime scenes in the woods, there's very limited amount of things that you can get a partial fingerprint from. That's either skin or some type of metal surface, weapon, bullet, unspent round, spent round, those type surfaces.
Well, the defense is claiming that there was a symbol drawn that resembled an F on a tree, and they suspect it was drawn. I'm assuming with the fingers. Would there be? Could there be anything that can be pulled out of that? Whether it be mixture DNA that they can separate, or a fingerprint out of the blood.
Certain blood, blood, of course, has certain characteristics to it, and you can leave if it's at a certain drying process part. If the blood had been there a while, and you touch a semi-dried, wet, almost plastic type of blood print, you can have a transfer ridge detail into it. But you can also, if you had the right, there's some barks and trees out there. It's almost like paper.
Mm.
That it's possible that you might. It'd be a long shot, but it's possible that you could get a bloody transfer print of ridge detail. Don't know. I have no idea.
Gotcha. No idea about the mixture aspect of it. Like, if they could they tell that obviously if they found Libby's blood, but if somebody put their hand in there, would there be a
Oh, yeah.
mixture of DNA in that blood?
You never know. I mean, different people shed. We don't know if he had gloves on. We don't know if he wasn't wearing gloves. We don't know if he uh, uh, with his bloody hands touched his face and then touched the tree or touched them. There could be all different types of mixtures of DNA.
Nice. Yeah. Good deal. And we have another question here from Lynn. She says, were these weighted tip toward the tip so that they fall downward? I'm not sure. Would that make a difference if they were weighted towards the tip?
Well, when I in the first debris of the bullets laying on top of the leaves,
Mm-hmm.
if you could go back a few photos, possible. These,
Oh,
uh,
those the ones I was at.
yeah, those. I dropped those from um, waist high, and you can see how they landed. They pretty well. You've got the nickel there at the bottom. To the left, if you go to the left, 3 o'clock from that's the aluminum one and that's the steel. But go to the nickel one
Mm-hmm.
and go to 9 o'clock straight over. Go to the left the other way.
Oh, they're sorry about that. Fine. Yeah.
Now come down, and you'll
Ah,
see
there
right
it
there.
is.
Uh-huh.
It's hard to see.
Yes, but I dropped these, and this is how they landed, and I photographed them to show you different aspects. This is before I stepped on them, but even after I stepped on them, they still didn't disappear.
Gotcha. You don't think that there's a possibility that one could be stepped in where it goes straight down, tip first?
Yeah, anything's possible. Um,
Yeah.
it, and it could be. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, if it landed right, these here I didn't, but I tell you what I'll do. I'll do that. I've got other tests. Let me see how. I'm a pretty good sized fella. I'll take my boot and I'll step on one and see how much effort it takes to press that bullet into a straight down that would penetrate the leaf patterns and go in to the ground. That's a great question, a great test.
And that's the other thing you mentioned. You said you're, a larger guy. Richard Allen isn't. I don't. I think at the time he may have been 200 pounds. Somewhere around there. Is that enough force to
Well,
to do something like this?
well, regardless, it will all equate out pretty much by the time that you look at. I got extremely large feet, but it depends on. It's just like how much weight is scattered out or how large of a surface.
Mm-hmm.
He may be 180 pounds, and whatever his weight distribution for a half inch of his sole would be. But we'll experiment and see how hard it is, and I'll get Mrs. Steve to step on it also, and whenever she gets here, and we'll find out um, uh, what the difference is, because like I said, when you have a bigger tread, that's how these track hoes and things work. That when you have large tracks and large treads, you can disperse the weight over a larger area. And so
Mm,
with smaller shoes, smaller tracks, you can have a almost equal amount of pressure, even between different size humans versus the size of their, um, as their weight is dispersed over their footprint. See what I'm saying?
yeah. No, I get that 100%. That's interesting. That makes sense, though. This the impact of all of the weight, isolated to one area. Yeah, yeah. I don't know the answer to this one. I'm not sure if you do. Too much mom asked if there was skin under the fingernails of any of the victims.
I don't know, but that is, I think there's been references made about that during the services that people noted that there was discoloration in the fingernails, and that's a normal process. That fingernail scrapings, fingernail clippings, they occur because if there's any signs of a struggle, that is where it is collected by the victims,
Mm,
and that's what we look for. We want them to be able to, that if we have the chance that they made contact with a skin area, that they collected those skin cells.
mhm. Alicia asks, for those that have seen the crime scene, were there a lot of leaves that the bullets could have been under? From my understanding, it was very similar to this type of
It is.
scenery.
It is. I've seen them. Yes,
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah, so like about this amount of leaves. This is obviously cleared there, but let me pull up like right here. This is pretty much what I understand it looked like.
Yes.
And so let's see.
But
I had a
during a struggle, you could have some bare areas, or you could have, you're talking about in February, there could have been areas that were exposed due to other animal activities. I don't know what type of animals are in the areas, from deer scrapes to hogs to, um, that could expose some earth, and I just don't know. Cattle, horses, I don't know what all access. I know that area is fenced um, in certain areas, and I don't know which animals have access to it.
mm, mm. Thank you, Naomi, for being a member for 4 months. We appreciate you. Heather also coming in with her membership for 11 months. Just thank you for all and still talking about this. Naomi comes in with a $2 super chat saying thank you and for an awesome guest. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank
I
you.
give them
Thank
blue lights.
you. And Jay Turkey asks, are metal detectors used in crime scenes in rural areas? So kind of like the question I'd asked earlier, given the size of Delphi, a population of 3,000 people, Carroll County is probably in charge of, a couple of different areas there. Do you think that maybe perhaps it was not available? Or do you think that maybe perhaps they didn't use the metal detector because at the time, they only were aware of, the knife injuries to the body and didn't see any evidence of a gun being used?
Well, um, at some point they would have looked at those video of what Libby took, and so they know a gun at some point. I imagine,
Mhm.
or it's been referenced that hey, he's got a gun or something. But
Right.
I expect that they realized or knew. It doesn't mean that they expect to find a bullet. And even if they found a bullet, I think some rumors are that they thought at first it was law enforcement, and there would have been a process trying to eliminate that. Um, but the resources that you have, all these agencies there, you have all these personnel from across this region. There's going to be someone, even if it's privately. Uh, our department never owned a metal detector, but we had people. We live here in the South, and we have a lot of people that are Civil War uh, enthusiasts that go out and metal detect all the time. And so you have those that you can contact these people and say, "Hey, uh, you mind to come in here?" And it's almost like if you don't have the trained personnel, you make do with what you got to make sure you cover those bases.
Yeah. So when it comes to this case, also like, what do you think it's what do you think is going to happen? You think they're gonna dismiss it? Do you think they got a case, or do you think that this is just a speed bump and they'll move forward?
They'll move forward.
It'll move forward. I think so
Yeah,
too.
yeah. No
I
matter
mean,
what they throw out, we're at the point that unless that judge gives a directed a verdict of some type, that they're going to go forward. And now, if the judge says, "Well, you can't have this, you can't have this, and you can't get this bullet in," because there's still going to be a lot of hearings as we move through these stages of prepping for trial.
yeah. One last thing about the Delphi case before we move forward on to Idaho and Bryan Kohberger's case. Um, the other thing that we do know that the perpetrator touched was the clothing. At least one of them was redressed in the clothes of the other victim. Uh, what kind of is there, if any, can you get? What kind of DNA or evidence, if any, can you get off of clothing that somebody may have manipulated or handled?
Well, regardless of where we're at now in technology, at some point, like I said, Lacard's principle says that you bring something to the scene, you take something away from the scene. And
Hmm.
anything that you touch, we may not have the technologies, and we may already be there. We may have the technologies that we can find that DNA, um, and they may have it. I believe that they have DNA. They may not have found it yet. I sent an airbag off that was contaminated with the offender's DNA to the lab 3 to 5 times before they were able to isolate our offender's DNA profile,
Hmm.
and because you can't see it, but that DNA was there from the time that airbag made contact with that offender to the
Hmm.
time that they finally recovered it, and it just took multiple times, and that may be what with this clothing that we have. You know, there's nothing saying that the offender wasn't injured, um,
Hmm.
and may have that they just haven't processed the right blood transfer yet.
Hmm. Did they swab Richard Allen? I think that would be a pretty good indication whether or not there was DNA there.
Yes, I think there was other people that they collected in the early days, other creators that was mentioned as suspects that
Hmm.
said that they were DNA swabs were taken from them. So yes, they would have. If you're doing it for um, possible suspects or persons of interest, you'll do it when you finally identify one.
Got you. Got you. Let's. I'm going to ask a few more questions, and we'll move on to
Sure.
from the comment section, and then we'll go to the questions. It says this one came in from Kyle. This is more of a comment. It says, personally, I know that there were no people that went to the scene 15th or 16th. I can't remember the exact date now. There wasn't any law enforcement keeping an eye on it, just taped off. Many locals went there. Does that sound accurate? I wasn't covering this case early on. Was it pretty loosely secured?
You know, I haven't spoken to anyone that was there within those early days, as you speak of.
Hmm.
But normally, that's the last thing that we take. Um, if we leave in tape up, we're leaving an officer to guard that that area. But you just don't leave tape up and then walk away from it. That's a procedure I'm unfamiliar with.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Yeah, I'm not the same thing. They may have been watching it from a distance, hoping maybe somebody would come back, maybe look around, look at something look for something you shouldn't be looking for. You know what I
And
mean?
if that's the case, it's not unsecured. You're there. You're watching it. You're looking at it. It's a strategy to see if the offender returns to the crime.
Right.
And but from watching that interview, it doesn't see. I think her name is McDonald or something.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Glenda asks, was the crime scene frozen the ground? I don't know. I know it was a 45, 41
Yeah.
degree day at that time. If it was that cold in the evening, it's covered in leaves. Um, would that insulate the ground and keep it frozen longer, the leaf coverage, and or that temperature of 41 degrees, is that high enough to unfreeze the ground if it's frozen overnight?
Um, I I think I looked at. I think it wasn't that it got below freezing that much or for that long, because it takes quite a while of
Mhm.
even freezing temperatures to get the ground down to be absolutely frozen and hard to contact. Um, so I don't know if it hit that, but I have those weather reports, and I'll see how long uh, the window would have been for the ground to freeze.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know either. I like all I know is that it was a normal warm day. Angel asked, "Was Libby's phone was it was found, and where was it found?" In the previous question, I believe it was found. Wasn't it found under one of them?
I believe so.
Now, if he moved the bodies and staged them and dragged them to their spot, do you think that he put the phone underneath them on purpose?
I don't believe so. I think that he would have probably dropped it. How many phones have I dropped that I put in my front shirt pocket, bent
Hmm.
over? Um, and if you looked at some of my phones, you could see I've dropped one of them numerous times. But the I think it would have just been something, and it could have been something that's part of his strategy that I'll leave the phone here. I don't
Hmm.
want it on my person. Um, that he may have been wise enough to know that if that phone's on and if it's pinging, I can't carry it with me, and
Oh, that's true.
it means nothing to me here. And so just leave it.
Yeah, because apparently, and Rebecca Ann asked this, it was pinging all over Delphi at one point.
And I
Uh,
did it. I went out there and did those ping tests, and Mrs. Steve pinged me with find my phone,
mhm.
and it's absolutely amazing what occurred while we were doing those tests. And I would move sometimes 10 feet, and it would ping me within a 5 mile area, and it would show me that I could be anywhere from Delphi itself to the crime scene.
Mhm.
And then um, sometimes it would show that I moved 100 yards when I only moved 50 feet.
Oh,
And
wow.
sometimes it was correct. It showed me exactly. But I've always been concerned about those pings, and because in the FBI affidavit, it's very general in the area near, um, and so like I said, those pings of what we did with I think I did those in last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Good deal. I didn't know that. I had no idea. I need to go
Hmm.
check that out.
Yeah.
Um, there was one other question I had seen. I'm trying to catch it real quick. Um, it was, I think his name's Dole. It just kind of jumped on me. Oh, here it is. Oh no, this is not it, but this is one. How did you decide the size of the scene to search, or how does a crime scene investigator decides the size of the scene to search, distance from the victims?
Yeah. Well, of course, if the search crew went there, we have to isolate. You have your victims, you have your check for signs of life, and then you secure the scene. And then you look for the obvious trails. How did someone get to this scene? And
Hmm.
how do we secure those? And, you can have that a very large scene, and you always you have your first line that when we first got here that this is what we secured, and then you double it, and you may even have a third area that you keep people out of, so that there's no possibility that anyone's going to be walking those trails or in possibly destroying evidence of where the uh, offender either brought the victims in or how he escaped the area. So it's a play by play. There's no set rule about um, how big in the area. It's always better to over achieve and lock down as large an area as you can get by with,
Yeah.
because you do a lot of things. You keep that crime scene out of the eye of the public and of the offender. He doesn't know what you found. He doesn't have access, because some of these offenders can get um, lost in the looky loos.
Yeah, that's true. Um, well, you know, that's some great information and great stuff. I mean, I got some more questions. I'm looking to see the answers to some of the questions that I have with the experiments that you have coming forward. Um, you said that a few of those will be done this week. Can you let
Yes,
everybody know
I'll
when
have
those
a
will be out?
show. Yeah, I'll have a show Saturday,
Uh-huh.
and just let me know what you need, and I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Well, I'll be watching, and maybe we'll do this again once we get the results. Um, to kind of move on into the Moscow, Idaho Bryan Kohberger case. First and foremost, there's been a lot of comments again and emails that we've had about this case, and it's been a lot about the DNA that was left on the sheath. Um, First and foremost, I think the DNA was found inside the button snap. I think the button snap on the K-bar knife sheath is made out of brass. There's been a question of, if this was touch or transfer DNA. How long would that DNA be able to last on that surface before degrading, or does brass need other elements such as weather and temperature to cause a degradation?
Well, that would have been recovered by, I would imagine, a lab tech. That's not something that you find the sheath on the scene, and you would bag it, tag it, get it out of that element so it doesn't, get thrown over on a table and get cross contaminated from some other surface.
Right.
So you seal it and get it out of there as soon as you get to that process for that. Um, and I would imagine that a lab tech would have found that. But as I sent you an article, that there are certain metals and there's a process, and I'm no chemist, I'm no whatever degree it takes to speak of this. It's out of my pay grade. But that certain metals do have certain reactions with DNA, and but we know in this case it wasn't to the point that it destroyed this profile. So
Mhm.
we have a profile. We have a profile that matches someone that doesn't that matches everything that was described about them. That has the vehicle, had the opportunity, was out and about, doesn't have an alibi that we're aware of, and the odds of that individual's DNA being found by an unknown lab tech that had no idea who Kohberger was to recover that profile. And it
Mhm.
just so happens to match this individual that's out and about during the same time period. I mean, the mathematics of that are
Right. You know, the biggest thing is that I've hear is that the DNA was planted, and I find that weird. And I'll explain this. These the theory is that he's innocent and that the DNA was planted. Well, if we run with the thought that he was innocent, let's go back to what he was doing after the crimes. He was wearing gloves. He was, police couldn't find his DNA anywhere. In fact, they went to his parents' house, pulled out trash, and they couldn't find DNA. If he was that good at keeping his DNA off of things, how did they get DNA to plant it on the sheath?
well.
You know?
That's the thing is that there's a timeline and there's evidence sheet of where that sheath was from the time it was recovered when it was sealed, bagged, and tagged.
Mm-hmm.
Who had access to it from that point on? The only way that you could have planted is either the investigators originally
Mm-hmm.
had whoever recovered the sheath would have had to know that, I'm going to go over here to Washington State and find me a guy that drives a vehicle similar and
Yeah.
gather his DNA and put it on it before I sent it to the crime lab,
Yeah.
because this sheath has a evidence sheet and it's locked up and it's turned over to a crime lab. This
Yeah.
isn't something that um, a CSI guy working in the field is going to be able to say, oh, here's a DNA profile. I processed it. I did this. This is the full, whatever the profile is, that you have an individual that has control of this sheath. And there's going to be a timeline that says, this is when we recovered this DNA profile.
Mm-hmm.
What day and time was that?
Yeah.
And for it to be planted, it would have to be prior to the time that the first DNA and who had access to it from the time it was recovered by whatever officer to the time that that lab technician says, on day 3, I did a swab, because the time that swab was done on that button is the key to absolutely show that the only individuals that had access to it. It's not like that in January that
Hmm.
they DNA profile that was way later, and that we sent the sheaf back 2 or 3 times, and uh, and then we found the profile
Right.
because they were eliminating people early on.
Hmm.
They were saying these individuals aren't responsible, and the only way you could say that some of those, what there's several Jacks involved or something,
Hmm.
name wise,
Yeah, Jack DeCore, Jack Showalter. Yeah.
yeah, that those guys weren't involved in this. And how would you be able to make that claim unless you had some type of DNA profile?
Right. Right. And I mean, how do you transfer? Like, how do you transfer DNA inside of a button snap? I mean, you probably have to use what, Q-tip. You got to go
Well,
somewhere where he touched something, get
well,
it on a Q-tip, and then go and rub it in there.
that's well, if but now if you're going to go with a conspiracy is that they just swapped Q-tips. They went and got one from him
Uh,
and
gotcha.
then throwed it in, because you can't see the DNA.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know if you were successful transferring it or not.
True. Yeah.
you know, you there's no way that you would know that. Oh, I was successful. I got his DNA in there. You can't see
Yeah.
it. You know.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy, but that was one of the things that, and then the other thing is that maybe he touched something, he touched a doorknob, he touched, he shook hands with somebody, and I'm like, if you guys say that he's innocent and he's this germ freak, and that's why he's wearing gloves, everywhere he goes, and that's why they can't find his DNA anywhere, then how did he get his DNA transferred to somebody who would eventually transfer it onto the sheaf?
Mhm.
It doesn't make any sense by that
And it's
logic.
not being single source, because then we have other.
True. That's exactly what I've been saying. I was like, and then in that situation, there should be a mixture of it, and it's not. It's the other thing that folks were saying was that, there was blood under on the sheath. Why is there only one DNA there? Single source DNA doesn't mean that that's the only piece of DNA on that sheath. That just means that it's not mixed with anybody else's DNA.
Yeah,
There could have been the victim's DNA all over that on the back of
I
it,
expect it was. I
right?
really do.
Now it was leather. Do you think that the leather protected the DNA sample inside of the sheath that was facing downward from getting contaminated with blood?
Yeah, I mean, it could play a large role in it, absolutely. And also, that anytime you unsnap, you know, any type of sheath, once the knife's clear, where does that snap go back to? Even the male and female, they almost reconnect,
Right.
and it can almost be an umbrella effect. And there's probably a lot of things that could have hampered the other blood transfers, because it would have been a nightmare. Just think that if there was a passive blood flow that had ran over that sheath and filled up that button, we wouldn't be in this position today.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're 100% right on that one. Now you mentioned, bagging and tagging. So I'm assuming that nobody's swabbing the knife sheath there on the scene, right?
I wouldn't be. I wouldn't even have any idea of that, because we don't know if we got fingerprints on that leather. Some of these, uh, we don't know what we have. And because there's a lot of alternate light sources to process and look at these, anything at a crime scene.
Hmm.
And the least amount of contact you have with an item, the least likely you're going to contaminate it with your own DNA,
Hmm.
or you've touched another surface and you didn't follow protocols and re-glove, or, as you do the gloving, on gloves, off gloves processes that, um, as we saw in OJ, because that was what got a lot of that issues brought up with OJ Simpson case, of not following protocols of how to collect each individual piece of evidence. And so um, we'd have to look at all that.
Gotcha. And so there's pictures, right, of the day that's there, and the Idaho State Police Lab forensic team is out there. Now, this is a Moscow, Idaho, Moscow Police Department case. Does that sheath go to Moscow Police Department and then transferred over to the state lab, or does that go directly to the state lab from the scene?
Well, it could have a lot of different things. As an investigator, if I had that knife sheath, I'd say, hey, we've got this. This is something that the more than likely brought the offender. We have uh, sharp edge weapon type of injuries, we have we've got witnesses that live there, and we say, hey, did y'all own a K-bar? And if they say, no, I've never seen or even knew about it, or we didn't have any type of knife weapons in the house, um, that would be something that might get a special escort to send this to the crime lab right now. Here's the sheet, isolate it, get it off, and because this belonged to the offender. And can we get DNA?
Yeah, I mean, given like you mentioned before, the speed in which they were clearing people, it was probably fairly quickly that they gathered that DNA information. There's been a couple of questions about the DNA, and I think there's been a little bit of confusion between the IgG, what the Idaho State Lab did with the STR profile, and what familial DNA from the dad's DNA in the trash is. Some folks are thinking that maybe perhaps the IgG pointed to Kohberger's dad. I don't think that's accurate. I think it pointed towards Kohberger. I think the only thing that had anything to do with Kohberger's dad was the trash pool, which is separate from the IgG. Am I correct on those things?
Sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah.
And it's usually that's the way it is. Whatever's the most easiest, reasonable explanation is what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. The IgG came second. I actually had a conversation with Gabriela Vargas, the defense's witness on the IgG. And she was telling us I got her to talk about the IgG and what it takes to create it. And apparently the STR has to be created first. And then the IgG is created basically out of the STR, which is that lineage and that tree. If that's the case, right? And Bryan Kohberger was connected through the STR profile after they found the DNA that connected to his dad. Do you think that the IgG can have any effect on the case? I mean, I think it's, even if you get it thrown out, it's not being used anyways, but I don't think that the fruit of the poisonous tree falls in there. I think, with the STR profile.
Yeah. No, I agree with the court they'll sort that out. I mean, but I agree with you. I don't think that if they're not going to use it, they're not going to use it, and it's a non-issue. They're trying to suppress the grand jury and all the other stuff, and the indictment is what they're trying to get thrown out. So I think they're just throwing everything against the wall, see what sticks and what can we get suppressed, and it's not working right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I agree with you 100%. Let's see. All right, we're going to ask a few questions and we're going to get into this video that you did on the Bryan Kohberger case, referencing what you can see at nighttime, and very similar to the scenario in which Dylan Mortenson found herself in that night of November 13th. But before we do that, let's pull these questions up really, really quickly. This one, I think we already answered. It says, could the DNA being in the snap have protected it from the elements? Yeah, I think I asked that one.
The umbrella effect. Yeah.
The wording in the affidavit is leading some people to believe that Bryan's dad's DNA could also be on the button snap. No, single source DNA, and it came back to when they tested the DNA from Bryan Kohberger's home. What they found was Bryan Kohberger's father's DNA, and the DNA came back as a match to whoever his son would be. You'd have to find the son. Let's see. What are your thoughts on Xana and Ethan's location? Blood outside of the back of the wall, but reports neither body was located in that area.
Doesn't mean that you couldn't have some type of injury and be there for a few minutes and possibly move to another location. Even trying, people do that. Don't know. But that's a possibility. I have no idea. I don't know where the bodies were, which we will find out when court's here. But, there's nothing that says that people have to stay in one location, especially when you have these type of injuries and knife fights and knife victims. there's a lot of movement in crime scenes with them.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. When it comes to their locations, we know that Xana, from all the indications, her body was found on the floor. We do know that there's a thud that's being heard on the audio. So, did that thud come from her falling off of a bed while while the suspect was there, or did the suspect already leave and then still alive fall off the bed and create the thud?
Get
I
up,
don't.
stumble, and fall. I mean, there's so many ways of thuds.
Right, exactly. So I'm not sure about that. Now I do know that, and it does make me believe that at least one person, maybe perhaps for a little while, survived. Is there was a report from Ashley Banfield on News Nation that the discovery of the bodies came from Ethan's best friend. I spoke with Christy Goncalves. She confirmed that that was the case, and that she spoke with Ethan's best friend, and that the location, basically what he had said was that he went up there, attempted to open the door in the second floor, but was unable to because the door was being blocked by Ethan in the way. And so that leads me to believe that somehow, I mean, you can't block the door and then walk out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He may have, in his last moments, trying to protect,
Yeah.
secured the door
100%.
best he could.
If possible, evidence has DNA on it, but has been outside, how long would it survive in the elements like snow and rain? Not on metal, but on cloth type material.
You know, you can look into, there's DNA profiles that are from hundreds, if not thousands of years. So, how long does DNA last? I mean, in the right conditions, we know for a fact that historically it can last for extremely long times.
Yeah. If the lights were out in the bedrooms, how did BK see enough to stab four people? Was there enough ambient light to do it? I don't know.
Well, I know that when I was doing my process, that my night vision after 30 or 40 seconds, even with some of these LEDs I was using, got pretty good. And doesn't take much light to move around. And because when I'm dealing with this individual here, he's over in the corner covered up. Mrs. Steve doesn't like him, um, and because he does have a extremely sharp knife. I only nicked myself one time with it.
Be careful with that, man. Um, what is your take on the absence of a blood trail from the scene? I'm not sure,
We
how
have a blood
accurate
trail.
that is.
Yeah,
Okay,
we have a footprint transferred blood trail,
right.
and so from that aspect of it, and I did a test on how far, if you stepped in a passive pool of blood, how far could you go? Mrs. Steve walked um, a layout of cards and a board, and she was able to track out to 140 something feet, I believe, that you still had under proper processing, be able to identify that shoe pattern. And the footprint that was recovered was in front of the witness's door, which would probably be somewhere 20 feet or so. We just don't know where the passive blood pool was, at what point inside of the room where Xana and Ethan were located. It could have been anywhere. It could have been on the victim, that we have that blood transfer that will allow that shoe pattern to, at some point, it could be oversaturated and not have a clear print. But as you walk and the saturation gets less and less, you're going to have a almost perfect print that comes out, is developed.
Hmm. But what they used in the probable cause affidavit, they stated it was a latent footprint. Well, wouldn't, forgive me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that mean it's not visible?
And that's true. That yes, it's not visible, but it's to the point that still being processed, it becomes visible. But
Gotcha.
yes, that even with my test, you can see that until you hit it, that Mrs. Steve, as she walked the 100 foot plus, that some of them you could just barely see that there was any design. But
Hmm.
when you hit it with luminol, it blew up like, oh, here it is.
Gotcha.
Here's the full print.
I have a question. I don't know if you've done this experiment, but Have you tried stepping in a pool of blood with cloth booties on, and then take those booties off and see what kind of trail it leaves?
I think uh, I've done it with the booties on, but I've not taken the booties off and see if there's a wicking or cross contamination. I'll do that, and I'll send that to you because that's your idea. I'll do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because like I'm just curious because if it's a latent footprint, and you're saying that if somebody's stood in a pool of blood, that you're looking at a couple of 100 feet or steps there,
Mhm.
and if they're looking at a latent footprint that's about 40 feet away, um, I think that maybe perhaps there was something that covered, I mean, or
Mhm.
lightened the print, because
I'll do it with both. I think I've done it with the booty on. I don't think
yeah,
I've done it with the booty off. But now, as far as absent of a blood trail of a injury of the offender, blood, whenever it gets on any type of surface, such as a knife or on your person, on your clothing, the the drip pattern is not going to last very long. If you saturate a knife or you go into your kitchen, get you a butter knife, wet it, and run it across your countertop, you'll see that after a few drops, that water pattern quits dripping just due to the surface tension, and there's not a sustained blood, a source of blood. And for a blood trail to last, and that's what, as CSI guys and ladies and techs, that when you're there, you're looking for that blood droplets that are 20, 30 feet away from the scene, for the fact that shows that our offender has a sustained an injury that is uh, uh, creating a source of blood that is continuously dropped as he leaves the scene.
mhm.
And but whereas if it's just something that's contaminated and is just dripping at a certain point, those blood droplets will quit because there's no sustained blood flow, and it's only from the victim. So generally, those blood droplets will be extremely close to where the source that was obtained, and if there's the offender doesn't have a injury, you're not going to have those blood droplets leaving a crime scene.
Got you, got you. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've been saying. I've been saying that, when people say that Brian Kohberger had no DNA in his car, I come back with, I mean, he wasn't actively bleeding. Nobody was actively bleeding in that car. For there to be blood everywhere, the only place that there would be blood is if wherever there was blood on him and he contacted somewhere. Now, if he took off his clothing and had a change of clothes before he went in and wiped himself off, then he's limiting the area that he would have to obviously clean after the fact. He had 7 weeks to clean up the car. After thinking about it, and given his knowledge and of forensics and things like that, I think that it was possible that he cleaned it up to the point where there was nothing there left anymore.
Or
Uh,
even if there was, it's not where you can process it to get a DNA profile.
yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, Dina Joe says, Steve, have you actually seen the bulletin? I'm not sure what she's
I don't know
referring
what
to.
bulletin.
Yeah. All right. So let's look at this. So, what is this test that you had done? Explain that to us. And
Well, I this test here was even in the full light position. If you look at the right hand as he faces you, it'd be on your left. But if you were holding a knife in your right hand, if you look in that position, it's hard to see that this individual has a knife that he's holding. It has almost a 7-inch blade on it, even in this image. And
right.
so I created this to show that in those low light conditions that he may have had this knife in his hand, and the witness. This test served a couple of purposes of what could the witness see of the offender, and what could the offender see of the witness standing in that doorway. And uh, this test was to create low light conditions, and whereas there's so many variables of how that offender, as he came across through certain lit areas, the intensity of that light, would you be able to see facial features? And and would the offender be able to see in the doorway when she was standing there through the shadows of what they could see? And I wanted to get a perspective of that. While I don't have the neon lighting source they had, I did create a multi-source LED lighting that was able, as you can see here, as he comes across the room, these low light conditions, you can't see anything around his waist area, but certain areas you can see his facial features.
Given the fact that the lighting source here is hitting his face, would that make the other parts that are in the shadows much harder to see, given that there is a light source that's coming up from that area?
Well, if you think about it, that working in low light conditions, if you have anything backlit behind him, it actually shadows the face.
Right.
So if there was light behind him that was very bright, it would almost offset any of this lighting coming from this angle.
Right.
And so, but there's only a very narrow window. That doesn't say that I'm anywhere close to what the light level was, because they could have been reflected light off of different appliances, walls, night lights.
Yeah.
I mean,
They had windows too.
Yeah, windows that could come in and reflect off the wall. It gives it a far easier ability to identify the offender.
Yeah, because right here, I mean, I think that the human eye can allow in a little bit more light than a camera can, so it'll probably be a little bit lighter than this. But
It was, but not much.
Right. This will probably be a pretty fair image of what she may have seen. And like you said, wearing dark clothing, being in the shadows in the dark, I think that a higher light source like that, illuminating the top part of his head, maybe it would cause, it'd be difficult to see. It sure looks like it's hard to see anything here. I mean, I think I would have difficulty even saying that this person has bushy eyebrows in this light.
Yeah, you can see that location with me. You can identify me.
Yeah.
If you knew who I was.
True. That's true. All right, so that's the light source that you created, that you put up there.
And I put the victim, and I have the door hinge wrong, but whenever I was creating it, I put them in the most exposed position, that if the door is open, regardless of which way the door is hinged, that they're standing inside or standing fully exposed in the door frame itself. And I wanted to see that through the shadow effect in the low light conditions, would you be able to see that her? Now, if the door is hinged the other way, she may have only had the door cracked 4 inches, and only looking through a 4-inch crack, which of course Kohberger absolutely wouldn't be able to see her, for the fact that when we get to the end of this video, you'll see that even when she's standing in the threshold this here is where she's standing 32 inches back. Even the full lit area, you're starting to have shadow effects that you really can hardly even see her, or this mannequin I have placed here. But when you put them in the, when we get on into the video, you'll see the other presentation also.
Yeah, I mean, even in this well-lit area, it's hard to see that person.
Yeah, I have a skeleton on the wall.
So I assume this is the dark.
This is when I turn off the lights. I come in there. You can see that you have that dark opening. This is the first path of when she's 32 inches inside. That absolutely, even with my human eye, I could not see her, which is a little bit lighter than this.
Yeah.
And I ran this path 2 or 3 times.
I need to take my glasses off on this one to see. I don't see anybody.
Oh yeah, I'm standing there, looking in, and
that's the other thing, I mean, if the rumors are true, and these are also rumors as well, that supposedly Dylan yelled something out, whether it's be quiet or whatever the case may be. If he's in the other room, tunnel vision, he may have heard somebody yell, but not know. He hasn't gone down, to the first floor yet. So he doesn't know where they are. He may have just, said it's time to get out and walk straight out the door and not see anybody.
When I set this mannequin up, I stacked the deck against the mannequin. I put white T-shirt on it, blonde hair. I put the most highly reflective styrofoam piece of what I put everything that if it's going to reflect and you can see them, you're going to be able to see them
Yeah.
in these low light conditions. I tried to stack it, put her fully out there in the threshold, and this was probably the most surprising part of the video. That even in this low light, that with my training clearing houses, I would have seen her.
Yeah.
But if you're just been in 4 fights, you may have walked right past her and never seen her.
Oh yeah. Tunnel vision too. It's a real thing. If he's like, I got to get out of here. It's time to go. Somebody yelled something out, and he's focusing in on the exit. He may never. I mean, she could have been out there, and because he's looking in that direction, never seen it.
And,
Oh, geez, I didn't even know you got that close to it.
that's what I'm saying. I'm standing in the threshold, and at arm's length, I'm using as you'll see here, I'm using my console to light up the face.
Yeah.
And when you take the light source off, she disappears.
Yeah.
And I'm 20 inches from her.
Yeah.
And then I went in and created another backlight with if there was lighting in the kitchen area from night lights or ambient light to see if it gives a better view. And that's what this, when you come in here, this next one is. I tried to stack the deck. I brought in these low light lanterns to give it even more of a lit area to create shadows to check.
Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, I mean, that's hard to see.
But like I said, there she is at my fingertips.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I said. I mean, a lot of people are looking at that situation and looking and dissecting it and seeing, these things that are, they can't tell that this is possible. That he could have missed her. She couldn't probably have not been 100% sure of what he was doing or what he was wearing.
But law enforcement knows the exact light level, and hopefully they documented it far greater, because I'm having to speculate and guess. They would have asked the witness what lights were on, where was he standing when you saw those features, what's those distances. They'll have it diagrammed out, mapped out, and be able to present that to a court. And that's the problem I had with them taking the house down. No one else will ever be able to stand in those locations and those as close as we can, regardless of what the sounds were. If you lit the house up identically as the time frame, you're going to be able to see certain things.
Yeah, I think you make a very valid point about what you can see and what you can't see inside that house. Because, I mean, they can replicate the house all they want, but it's not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same house. It's not positioned, in the same place. Does the sun hit the house in a certain way that illuminates, or the moon hits this house in a certain way that illuminates the interior? Those type of things that we'll never know now.
No.
Yeah.
You look at this, I mean, the silhouette is extremely disturbing. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that that's going to be pretty close, I would imagine, regardless.
I would think so, too. I mean, there's no hair, right? We know that there's no hair, because if there was hair, they would have tested that. There wouldn't be need for the DNA off the knife sheath. So that tells me that there was no DNA under fingernails or any of those type of things. DNA, hair is easy to come off. I think that he would have probably been wearing something like that to prevent hair from falling off. What other things can somebody do to prevent, losing hair?
Well, I mean, just like the restaurant business, you got hair nets.
Yeah.
I mean, how prepared was he, this offender? And regardless of who the offender is, other than that sheath, we don't know. And we would know by now. That doesn't mean that they're not continuing processing. And there may be other DNA. They just haven't found it yet. I always say that, but that's the truth. At the end of the day, I've been there, whereas it took multiple times of things being tested before that DNA profile was found. And it was on an airbag that's locked inside your dashboard of your car. And it can only have two DNA profiles on it of when it, or, whoever the installer is. And, or so it'd be three plus my victim or the offender, because we knew this passenger side airbag made contact with the offender because it broke his gun.
Hmm.
And, you know, and
Hmm.
that's only to be held, could occur by him being a passenger when the airbag was deployed.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, forensics is it'll catch everybody eventually, and it's tricky. Um,
Oh yeah, and I can't wait to see what the next advancement in DNA is. I mean, it's coming, guys. You know,
oh yeah. What do you think about the IgG stuff? Are you with it? The fact that they're one of the arguments is that some of these folks that are doing it aren't aware that their DNA is going to be possibly used in a law enforcement case. Um, how do you feel about that? Do you think that that's something that every person should have the right to decide? If they want to do their ancestry and know that their DNA goes out there, that's up to them. Well, how do you feel about it?
well, I think that if you go out and commit a crime, you have no um, that if it's gone through the court surface, and there will be precedents set for this. There will be at some point, it will go to the Supreme Court. It will be settled that
Mhm.
what are your privacy rights as far as an offender versus your kinfolk looking to see if they're kin to you or not. you know,
Yeah.
and but that will be settled. Right now, it's going to be argued in the courts, but there will be a case that will define exactly how this will happen. I don't think we have one that, I don't know what the highest ruling is right now. Do you,
Mhm.
or the highest finding?
As far as this goes, I don't. Well, I know that they've used the IgG in other cases, and I think that some of it's been argued, but it's been denied. Like the Golden State Killer, I don't know if they argued, this thing, but there have been a few of them that have asked for, uh, you know, the tree and stuff, and the FBI has never had to give it away or give it up because, at the end of the day, it's like a lie detector test. It's not admissible in court. It doesn't necessarily prove that Bryan Kohberger did anything. It just kind of points in that direction. It
Mm-hmm.
just, because they didn't test his DNA. The FBI didn't test Bryan Kohberger's DNA to the DNA on the sheath, so you can't confirm it. It's just a highly, you know, accurate guess. Is what you can say. You can't go off of a guess and get somebody arrested. So you have to build your case, which
Yeah.
is what they did. But when it comes to this, I think that the reason why they're entertaining this whole IgG mess that Ann Taylor wants to go through with is because it hasn't happened in Idaho. It's not. So they're going through this whole thing about whether or not somebody should get it, somebody shouldn't get it. And I think that after this case, like you mentioned, in Idaho at least, it probably won't be an issue anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that this type of stuff is going to be utilized more often. I mean, I don't see what's wrong with it. I mean, why do we have to have a cold case to find a killer, and if you have this tool to find them much sooner? You know what I
Well, I
mean?
mean, we can get search warrants for, everything from your bank records.
Hmm.
If you're, even if you're a victim of a crime, uh, there's financials done on you if you're a homicide victim, because
Hmm.
we won't know, is there someone new in your life? Are you spending money? You know, uh, and that they would have done that. Now, I expect that they would have done all this to see if there was any type of relationships for the fact that where did you travel? What did you spend money on? Is there someone new in your life? I mean, that's just part of homicide 101. I mean, you've got to know everything about that victim, doing that victimology of persons that have entered your lives, because typically you are the victim of someone and
Hmm.
you have a relationship. Um, Not always, as we see sometimes, but because not all four of these would have had a relationship, uh, but which one of them, and they may not even realize, because that's the thing when you're dealing with psychopaths, it's not what your relationship is, it's what his perceived relationship is.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Um,
You know, to me, I think that you're absolutely right when it comes to because people ask, like, why would he do this? Why would he do that? And I'm like, you're trying to add reason to an unreasonable situation, and it doesn't fly that way. But when it comes to like Kohberger, as far as like, why he did this, or if there was an infatuation with one singular victim, I don't see the evidence for that. I don't see the evidence for somebody that's angry, somebody who's been, who's upset because they were turned down, or things like that. This person went in, drove around 3 times, waited for the right moment to go in. To me, everything points to a thrill. To me, it points to, BTK type of person who, it's not necessarily the victims, it's the act, and maybe the victims to a certain extent, to create a higher profile case. Because when it comes to like some of these theories that are out there, like, oh, it's the frat guys, and I'm like, well, if you're looking at something that's out of rage, right? Because if this guy, in a frat case, he's mad, he's drunk, the the drug of choice that they're saying that he's using is steroids, and that he has roid rage. Those type of scenarios don't usually typically end up with little DNA, little noise, little no breaking of entry. I mean, if the guys want to go through 3 people to get to one, is he really going to drive around 3 times before he goes into the house?
yeah.
Those things tell me that this guy was trying to, it was more of a thrill. The knife aspect of it, I think, is more of the stealth aspect versus the personal aspect.
Mhm.
You know, so that's where I'm at on this case here with this guy. Do you think that he could be, that could follow, that could be possible? This guy could just be one of those, could have been the next serial killer if he didn't get caught.
May already be.
That's true. That's true. We don't know if he has other victims. That is true. I do know that they had found ID cards, right, in his house in the Poconos, and shortly after that, news articles that were covering, that situation started talking about somebody getting broken into. A coworker of his being broken into, and Kohberger being the person that installed cameras into that house. And now they suspect that he was the person that had broken into initially I'm thinking that maybe one of those ID cards was his. And so he may have had several other victims that he was watching, breaking in, doing
BTK,
these type of
he
things.
had projects. That's what he did. He had multiples.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, he sure did. Um, when it comes to the other evidence that's out there for Bryan Kohberger, the phone aspect, I'm not sure how much you're aware of it, but they did a warrant for his GPS locations on his phone. Are you familiar with how accurate those locations are comparable to the locations that you get from triangulating a phone?
Um, from my understanding of just analyzing what the father said, what
Hmm.
Steve said, um, that we're going to be made aware of a tracking ability that investigators are not aware of. That not all investigators, but that we will be made aware of after this case.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, uh, because he mentions in that interview, almost as if we know the location where he stopped momentarily, and looked, and that's some pretty precise information. If they have that, it doesn't matter, guys. It doesn't matter about the DNA. Do what you want to with it, because if they got you 40 feet from a window and turning around in a drive, if they have that much data on you, it's a done issue. We won't even have a trial. I can't see there being a trial.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
they can, if they can't fight and stop that indictment, the DNA is the least of their problems. If this other tracking stuff is there.
oh yeah. I mean, they also have the phones downloaded of the victims, and so if he was there or even inside that house at one point when they weren't, he's done. It's not like they have a big time frame, a big gap that they have to go through. It's very small. It's a few months. It's June
Yeah.
to November.
And that's where you have to show that these victims, through their financials, that we don't have an ongoing relationship. I mean, it's one thing if he's a boyfriend
Hmm. That's
and
true.
we eat and went out to dinner and we had all kind of great times together. It's one thing, but it's not if we just drove in from Pennsylvania, started school in Washington, and we like to drive at night. I believe he does like to drive at night, and I think that should be a warning to a lot of people that he probably was doing some pretty weird things at night. Um, I stopped people that had socks over their shoes walking down the side of the road, that they would black out everything. I know what they were doing.
Yeah.
They're keeping toms. They have that where I'm gonna go and see what's going on during after the bars close. I'm gonna stalk victims, and was he identifying others? Was this going to be the first of many, or was it? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the shoes, the socks outside of the shoes, that's the first one for me. I've never heard of that one. That one's crazy.
Oh yeah, yeah. I almost ran over him. He was in totally dark, just like this guy. I
Yeah.
mean, he was blacked out from head to foot, and uh, I got him. Stopped for whatever reason. He decided to stop when I turned on blue lights, and I got out with my flashlight and swept him the hands, and my light hit his feet, and he had socks. And I said,
Yeah.
"You and your bare feet?" And he said, "No, no, my shoes are under my socks."
That is weird. That
Yeah,
is weird.
yeah.
I had a weird situation like that. There was a bonfire that the high school had, and somebody tried to light it, so they called authorities. Me and my couple of other cops show up, and we find these kids, and one of them is missing his pants, and he has a puppy with him, and we can't figure out why he's missing his pants, and he has a little dog with him, and he has his buddy with him, and we're like, hey, why is your buddy missing his pants? He's like, I don't know, he had pants when we got here. And it was crazy. We ended up hooking him up for like arson because they actually lit it up, and they went back. I think they were like 19 at the time, 18,
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean, was that part of his that I'm gonna go and as I stalk these people or stare in the windows, um, is it part of disrobing part of his fantasy? I mean,
probably.
there's some sick individuals out there.
Oh
You
yeah,
and you cannot make rhyme or reason. You can't think like they do. I mean,
yeah.
it's impossible.
Yeah, 100%. We'll answer a few questions and then we're going to be calling it a show. Angel D says, uh, want to know what kind of idiot would drive. Oh, wait, wrong one. What are your thoughts on somebody driving their own car? One of the biggest things out there is that, Bryan Kohberger would have been smart enough not to drive his own car. What are your thoughts on somebody stealing a car to get away with a crime or renting one or borrowing one?
Well, if you steal something, you have another something else that has to. You have to have a staging ground. You have to
Mhm.
have a place where you can keep this vehicle. You can't keep a stolen car in your parking spot next to your vehicle
Right.
and go back and forth without it being discovered at some point because there's bolos on that vehicle.
Mhm.
Um, and or if you borrow someone's vehicle, they're going to say, "Hey, so and so borrowed my car that night." It's not easy, uh, and it's far easier just to use your own vehicle. You may put different plates on it, but with modern technologies, you got to be careful about that because these plate scanners, you know, they'll identify all kind of things, and
Oh, yeah.
so
Yeah, I thought it was a ridiculous thing, and it's something that's always coming up. And one thing I always tell people, and I just wanted to get somebody else's perspective from that has a law enforcement background as well, that using somebody else's car is probably the dumbest thing somebody can do, and continue to do that if you're wanting to get away with a crime, because in that situation, like you said, you got to get away with two crimes now. You got to hide and stash the vehicle. Borrowing a vehicle, if it was Bryan Kohberger, he's new to the area. Who's going to borrow a vehicle from? Somebody that works that he goes to school with. They're all PhD or criminology students wanting to be cops. I don't think that's an avenue. And so, renting it out, there's a paper trail. So I never thought that there was it was a smart thing to do. Extreme Blonde comes in. It's like, how do you think he encountered the person he targeted in the home, and how do you think he stalked them?
I mean, we got our social media presence now that what groups were they tied into? What bars had he visited? Um, on his long night drives, did he um, know that, everybody comes to this um, uh, food truck? I mean, there's so many ways that, you know, some of these offenders, where do you find women? Supermarkets. There's so many different ways that these offenders find their victims, identify, and once they get on your trail, you may or may not ever be aware of it.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Steal somebody else's car, get got sooner. Yeah, I'm gonna look through this real quick. No, I don't got anything else. Well, I appreciate you, Steve, for coming by, man. This was a great show. This was a great conversation. You answered a lot of questions that I personally had myself, about this case that I didn't know the answers to. Uh, and I appreciate your what you've done, your service in the past, and now trying to explain things to people. Let me show this to everybody so they can see where they can find you. If you want to give everybody your information, whether you're on Twitter, Instagram, I know True Crime Web is your
Yeah.
YouTube channel.
Yeah, that's
Please
pretty
go.
much it. I don't know what Mrs. Steve does with everything in the background. I We work cold cases, and I'm so busy all the time on the road, traveling on a lot, and we got a lot going on. But yeah, I never realized when I started my channel, which I originally started it just to become a spokesperson for law enforcement and to advise people this is how law enforcement looks and at certain things, and never realized that families would start contacting me to help work cold cases. And I'm in a position I've never been in uh, uh, before, and it's these families appreciate it so much, and I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, I agree. It was, you know, I'm new to this aspect, but I've had a lot of people as well contact us from Amy Malavik case to other cases, including even talking to the victims in the Idaho case as well. Some of the victims' families, and I apologize. Um, yeah, it's sad though, at the same time, and it's hard.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. I
you,
spoke with a mother this morning who lost a child, and she's crying with the progress that's been made. She's happy for, but she still lost a child, and she's absolutely destroyed by that. And so, but seeing them, the impact, because they want people to not forget their child and to understand that um, that they want uh, something looked into continuously. They want verification of that their child didn't die in vain.
yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody should, nobody should outlive their children, and when you do, it's a horrific and a horrible situation that nobody should have to go through. Again,
Absolutely.
thank you again, Steve. Again, it's True Crime Web. Go check him out. Let him know that you got his channel through us. He has a few more things that are going to be coming up in the Delphi case and in the Kohberger case as far as test goes. He's going to be talking about. He's going to be talking about the results of some ammunition that he put out there in the dirt. Go check that out. You don't want to miss it. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in, all our members, mods, subscribers. If you guys are still here and you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Until next time, guys.